Assembly Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber.
Into shared and integrated education, with the Community Relations, Equality and Diversity Policy Review. And next steps, the DE and Eddie oral briefing. Just refer you to the clerk's cover note at page 131 and to the relevant papers. We have the EQIA summary and the ETI review of CRED. We'll welcome the following officials. We have Faustina Graham, who's Director of Collaborative Education and Practice at DE, Paul McAllister, who is the Assistant Chief Inspector in the ETI, and Andrew Bell, who is Head of Shared Education and Community Relations Team at DE. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Can I welcome you all to the committee this morning? And can I ask you to make an opening statement, and members will follow up with some questions.
Of course. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee on the review of the Community Relations, Equality and Diversity in Education Policy, obviously CRED for short, and the Minister's decision to end the CRED earmarked funding, and also then on the way forward. I'm accompanied by Paul McAllister from the Education and Training Inspectorate and Andrew Bell from the Shared Education and Community Relations team. It may be helpful just to begin by reminding the members of the aim of the CRED policy, and the aim of the policy is to contribute to improving relations between communities by educating children and young people to develop self-respect and respect for others. Importantly, the policy was designed to underpin and support existing curricular requirements, and those would be in particular personal development and mutual understanding at primary level, and learning for life and work at post-primary level, as well also as the general curricular aims of developing young people both as individuals and as contributors to society. Earmarked funding of almost £5 million has been provided over the 4-year period since the policy was introduced in 2011. And that funding was largely allocated to capacity building of the education workforce, and also to the development and dissemination of both resources for CRED and also of good practice in CRED-related work. As part of the normal policy making cycle, a review of the policy commenced in September 2014. The review itself confirmed that significant progress has been made. Over 2,000 school leaders, governors, youth service managers, teachers and youth workers attended awareness-raising sessions over that period of time. In excess of 4,000 teachers and youth workers have been trained to improve their knowledge and skills related to CRED issues. A quarter of all principals have engaged in training on dealing with controversial issues in the classroom. And over the last 2 years, almost 800 schools and youth organisations received advice and support in implementing their CRED policies. During the same period, 810 programmes were delivered, involving approximately 25,000 young people. Guidance has been developed that is supported by a dedicated website, and that website provides a one-stop shop for practitioners, including case studies, resources and support materials. A review of those CRED resources identified a significant range of good quality resources covering all of the Section 75 groups, including teaching plans and materials that teachers and youth workers could access and use. Monitoring of the effectiveness of the policy included a series of focus groups with teachers, youth workers and young people, together with the commissioning of a module in the Young Life and Times survey. The evidence indicates that the majority of young people experienced CRED activities and that good provision is effective in changing attitudes. Last year, as part of that review process, the Department commissioned the Education and Training Inspectorate to undertake a formal review of the CRED policy. Work was undertaken over the autumn term, and their report was published on the 25th of February 2015. That evaluation was positive, and it demonstrated that implementation of the policy has been largely effective. Practice in most of the schools and youth organisations visited was effective. Indeed, the majority of the taught sessions which were observed were evaluated as being very good or better. The report has also made a number of recommendations for further embedding CRED within the curriculum, and those include ensuring that the rights of the child underpin practice, that CRED is embedded in a strategic overview of all policies and developed further through priorities for youth, and also that the development of shared education is referenced in light of emerging research and practice. The report additionally recommended that the Department continues to support the personal and professional development of staff and governors in schools and youth organisations to promote and embed CRED, and also for the Department to foster more effective links with other departments and agencies to support schools further and youth organisations in working in their local communities. The committee will be aware that as part of the action to address pressures on the extremely challenging 2015-16 education budget, the Minister has now ended earmarked CRED funding. Prior to making his decision, a full equality impact assessment was carried out, which was the subject of a public consultation that closed on the 6th of March. In publishing its equality impact assessment, the Department identified the potential impact of ending of CRED earmarked funding on certain Section 75 groups, specifically persons of different religious belief, racial group, sexual orientation, and persons with a disability and persons without. However, a number of mitigating factors were identified to address potential adverse effects on those groups. Turning to the public consultation, 23 responses were received, and respondents identified impact on similar groups as those I've outlined. A number of respondents were not content with the mitigations outlined by the Department. In particular, respondents expressed concern that disability, sexual orientation and race would not be the primary foci in the Shared Education Signature project. Some responses highlighted concerns around potential negative impact on the youth sector, and in particular the skills capacity within the voluntary youth sector. Following consideration of the outcomes of the public consultation, the Minister decided that, on balance, there were sufficient mitigating actions to justify his proposal to end CRED earmarked funding as part of that challenging 2015-16 budget. Those mitigating factors include the focus on protecting frontline services as far as possible, that earmarked funding for CRED was intended to support the initial implementation of the CRED policy, and that the curriculum requires schools and youth groups to address community relations, equality, diversity and inclusion. The decision to end earmarked funding does not mean the withdrawal of the policy, which will remain in place. The advancement of shared education, including provision of funding, will allow educational settings to continue to provide opportunities for meaningful interaction between young people from different community backgrounds. School and youth organisations continue to be required to adhere to the policy aims and objectives, utilising their mainstream funding to deliver curricular requirements. The Department expects the Education Authority and the Youth Council to continue to support the implementation of the CRED policy and also to minimise any potential negative impact on the particular needs of those of differing sexual orientation, racial group and disability. In terms of the way forward, then, officials are working to revise the CRED policy to take account in particular of the findings of the ETI evaluation and the ending of earmarked funding. It's envisaged that the core of the policy will remain unchanged, but that the associated actions will be updated to reflect the mainstreaming now of this work. In revising the policy, we will explore the synergies with shared education in order to ensure that the good work observed by inspectors is built upon and continues to make significant difference. Naturally, we will offer to brief the committee on the revised policy once this work has progressed. I trust that this has provided the committee with the CRED review findings, the rationale for the Minister's decision to mainstream CRED work, and our plans to update the current policy to build on the successes that have already been achieved. And at this point, we welcome the opportunity to answer any questions which committee members might have.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the briefing. Essentially what you're saying is that the reason why this is being withdrawn is purely as a result of funding?
The challenging budget, yes, in order to protect frontline services, and obviously difficult decisions had to be made, and this was one of them.
So there is a recognition that this was a policy which was working and was benefiting quite a substantial number of young people within our society.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's no intention on the part of the department that should change. I think the point of the policy and the additional money that was allocated to it, the earmarked funding, was to really ensure that schools and youth settings had the opportunity to look carefully at what was required within CRED, but it is an integral part of the curriculum. So there has been, since the introduction of the curriculum in 2007, that requirement. So this was really to enhance that at the beginning of the process, and now it is something to be embedded in the curriculum. So this is something which will continue, irrespective of funding.
Yeah, although the funding did actually give structure to the programme, yes, which is now going to be lost. So how are you going to ensure that there is some type of structure and that can be measured?
I think importantly, and obviously as I've said, what we're in the process of doing at the moment is looking at the way forward, and I think it's important for us to take a considered view of that. And I think it was timely that the policy was due for review in 2014, which meant that we were looking actively at the outworkings of the policy and what was being successful at that point in time. The most important part, I think, of that review was the Education and Training Inspectorate's evaluation, because with the recommendations, and obviously I've touched on some of them, but there's a great deal more detail, as I'm sure you're aware, in the report itself, but with those recommendations from the Education and Training Inspectorate, I think that allows us to do exactly what you're saying, which is to shape how this will move forward for schools and for youth organisations, but also I think making clear to the Education Authority and the Youth Council that expectation is there, that because there was money that was earmarked in that way does not mean that those structures should disappear, or that a change or a modification in those structures can't take place, I think, depending on what resources allow.
The other factor maybe to mention as well is that the funding was there for a very specific purpose, and it followed on from the previous review of the community relations schemes, which is where the CRED policy evolved from, following again an ETI evaluation, and that funding was specifically around capacity building and dissemination of good practice. Because it is now part of the curriculum, one of the issues which that previous review had identified, and the reason why we put in funding around capacity building, was the teachers were telling us that while they recognised it was within the curriculum, that they didn't have the capacity or the skills to deliver it. So that is where the focus of that funding had been over the period of time. And Festina has already outlined the figures. Significant numbers of educators, both teachers, principals and youth workers, have been trained in given those skills so that they can actually address those issues. So the funding was very much for specific purposes. What the Minister is now doing is, in light of the budget reductions, is mainstreaming that. The capacity has been built within the system, and basically schools and youth organisations will actually mainstream that work through their existing funding.
And whilst I can see that it perhaps might be easier to mainstream within a school setting, it might be more challenging within a youth organisation, particularly those within the uniform sector and so on as well, who rely very much on volunteers. And there's obviously a large turnover of volunteers over a period of time, who obviously will require capacity building and so on as well. So how will you ensure that that's not lost within that sector?
Well, we've asked the Youth Council, particularly through their existing funding, to make sure that they, address that issue, but also the fact that priorities for youth is a key element of priorities for youth, and it actually mentions that CRED is a specific issue which is addressed within priorities for youth, and as regional plans are taken forward, the department will expect to see associated work delivered. Working with the youth sector, the youth sector themselves would say that it is integral to their work. They see it as integral to their work anyway, and the way in which they deliver is through their joined inequity, diversity and interdependence, the JEDI work that they would do, and that very much drives how youth work is taken forward. The whole issue with volunteers has always been a difficult one to try and address, and even during the period of this policy when we were funding, it was very difficult to address the training needs of youth of volunteers because of the way in which they operated and the fact that you're asking people to give up actually more time from their volunteer work to be trained in these issues. But that was an issue which the Youth Council were particularly looking at, and we will continue to work with the youth sector to try and ensure that those issues are addressed, and indeed through obviously the statutory youth organisations covered by the Education Authority.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, and you're very welcome. Can I just go back to the what you said there, Christina, in terms of largely effective? When we talk about the budget implications and so on, was the quality of delivery or the quality of projects on the range of provision and your concerns about the level of rigorous assessment in schools and youth clubs as well, was that a concern as well?
In what way, sorry?
In terms of stopping the funding of the project.
I think with any work in schools, as you know, there will always be variation, and I think it is for the evaluation that took place, it was very much about looking at best practice, but also accepting that we haven't completed the journey of a uniform approach across the education system to the implementation of the CRED working. And I think there will always be that requirement to upskill people. And I think as schools progress in this work, once the training has been delivered, what we can see is increasing sophistication in the rigorous evaluation then of what schools can do. But I think people are at different starting points, and I think often what you will see in that situation is that it depends on the whole school approach to evaluation generally. So I suppose all of those things come into play in the evaluation.
Surely it's hard to separate the protecting frontline services from this when you use the phrase there, the good provision is effective in changing attitudes, and surely meaningful interaction between our young people from different backgrounds is essential if those attitudes are to be changed and continued. So it's really very hard to separate. You know, is that not one of the frontline aims of education here in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as Andrew has indicated, it was a situation where difficult decisions had to be made in very challenging circumstances. That's the decision that has been made. And I think what I was trying to say earlier about the work that has been done by ETI is that for us in the department as we move forward, we have a good basis of recommendations on which to revise the policy and actually point a way towards embedding this in the curriculum in a way, in a sustained way, I think, which is important. And as you know, whether it is £1.1 million in this instance or whether it is £10 million, the money itself does not actually always make the difference. It's very welcome, but what makes the difference is the people who are working and who are actually contributing and see the response and the reaction from the young people they're working with. And that is, I think, what will ultimately make the difference. It is incumbent on us to do the best job we can, I think now, in light of the fact that that decision has been made to end the funding. And I think we have good information coming back from the evaluation and review that took place that will allow us to begin to do that. And as I said, we will come back very happily to brief you on what we can do in response to that, but we're not at that point yet.
I think one of the shames is that, one of the shames of this is that, some of the great practice out there will possibly now not be disseminated to other places as well. And suppose, is it really down to financial reasons that the department weren't able to put in a more structured and funded support for the programme?
Well, there was. I think, as we talked, there was quite a structured support up until now for the programme, and I think it doesn't mean that because the money is there that those things will all be lost. I mean, I think that would be something where we're creating a dependency culture as opposed to actually empowering both our schools and our education authority and youth council to do this work. I think, you know, one of the things that we're looking at generally, certainly within even teacher professional development, is empowering people to actually create a self-sustaining system, because we can't have a system which is entirely dependent on money, welcome as it is, and I would never not want money to come into the education system, but I think it is when people actually have engaged, and I've listed the statistics there of the people who have been trained, the cascading effect of that across the school, when those leaders have been trained and when teachers and youth workers have taken forward work in their own school, I think allows that to grow exponentially as well, and that was the intention of the original funding.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. McCausland.
Thank you. I was interested in the ETI inspection into CRED. One of the recommendations going forward was, and you referenced it in the presentation there, that the rights of the child as defined in the UN Convention, the rights of the child should be more central to the outworking of CRED in policy and practice. Now, when I checked through the document on the internet, there were no other really references to rights other than that recommendation. So it would be helpful maybe if you could just explain to me in what way they haven't been more central in the past and how you envisage they would be more central in the future.
Do you want to take that
take
one?
that. The first thing I would say is that the United Nations Rights of the Child, that convention, would give a common platform for this work right across Northern Ireland, and I think it's important for teachers that are just starting out on this work to see it in that broader context. And going through the particular articles, there are some that automatically link with this Article 2 in relation to non-discrimination. Article 12 relates to the respect for the views of a child. Article 23 relates to children with disabilities. Article 28 relates to a child's right to education and what that should mean. Article 29, the goals of education that's provided for the child. And Article 31 relating to the leisure, play and culture. Now, those provide a very good backdrop which can be taken in common by schools in all sorts of different situations across Northern Ireland, serving children from all sorts of different backgrounds. And then it means that there's a clear understanding on the part of the teachers, the management, including the governors, of what it is that CRED means for the children in their school. And it also means then that the parents can have confidence in what the school is providing against that backdrop.
So there, thank you for that. In regard to the department, then the department is absolutely clear that the education sector in Northern Ireland, because the United Kingdom has signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the education department should be following through on that.
Well, the policy, the CRED policy actually references the NCRC. I appreciate that, but I'm just asking, just generally then, is that the position of the department that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child should be followed through on? Well, we have referenced it within the policy, and therefore by default we are acknowledging the fact that...
Second, appreciate that very much. The second thing is this. You mentioned there awareness raising for governors that have been held in the past. And would you envisage that in the future there would be similar awareness raising for governors? I can understand funding projects, there's a cost. An awareness session for governors isn't really that expensive in comparative terms. So would you envisage there, going forward, awareness raising for governors and others on the general area of CRED, and that would therefore include the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child?
The governor training was in response to identified needs. We worked with the boards at that stage to identify all the training needs, and governor training needs came up, and there were quite a number of governors who received training needs. The way we would envisage going forward is that if there are other identified needs, then we would be looking to the Education Authority to work with them as to how those needs are identified. However, CRED is referenced within the Governor's Handbook, so it's already specifically referenced there for governors. But if there are continued needs, we would need to be looking to see how those are addressed.
And is there much in the Governor's Handbook about it, or?
There's a section on CRED within the Governor's Handbook.
That's 6 lines or 6 pages?
It's been a while since I looked at it, so I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Sure,
but it is definitely referenced. We were quite keen. When the policy went in, one of the commitments that was made within the policy was to look at other areas that would support it, and Governor's Handbook was one of the areas we looked at, so there was stuff in it.
And the final question is, in terms of race, how do you view that? I mean, at a UK level, when the UK government is responding to international conventions on racial issues, they interpret that legally as being an ethnic group. So it doesn't mean a colour or a nationality. It could be an ethnic group within the United Kingdom. So how do you... And there's a legal basis for the definition that they use. Do you have a particular definition that you use for race?
Perhaps I could come in there. I would refer to a course I attended as a teacher many years ago in Coromila, which was called Meeting the Other Side as a Partner in Education. And one phrase that has stuck with me since then is the phrase free to be. And a key concept that was conveyed at that course was, when you come in the door of a school, it doesn't matter if you're a girl who wants to play football, you're free to be. If you've got ginger hair or no hair, you know, you're free to be. And that was continually reinforced throughout the course. And in relation to race, if a person sees themselves as, you know, from whatever country, Slovakia, Afghanistan, if they see that as their identity, that should be respected, and they should be encouraged to have self-respect for that identity, how they see themselves, and other people should respect them for that.
I'm just dealing there more with and I appreciate that entirely, within the United Kingdom, the different ethnicities within the United Kingdom, whether it be Welsh or Scottish or Irish or Ulster, whatever, those would be seen as race under the legal basis that's used. Is that how it's understood here as well?
Well, don't forget that the CRED policy is to address, and indeed the curriculum, the issues within the curriculum, are to address issues that are faced by communities. So we know from, for example, PSNI hate statistics, as to it's very often the newcomer communities here that are affected by those. And what schools are encouraged to do under this policy is to look at the issues that are facing the young people that they're dealing with within their communities and address those particular issues. And given that the indications are that most of the issues that we face within this society are around the newcomer groups, then that's what schools have been addressing through it.
I'll not pursue the matter here, just make the observation that if we're looking at Section 75 and the definition of race at a UK-wide level has a legal basis set down in the courts, I think it's important that that's kept in mind in looking at racial issues here, because Indigenous ethnicities are also covered by that.
Could I just say, I think the real thrust of this is about mutual understanding, and so in both the Key Stage 1 and 2 curriculum, these are available from SIA, and the 3 and 4 curriculum, or the Key Stage 3 curriculum in that case, mutual understanding is pointed out as key elements of the curriculum. Personal understanding as well for the Key Stage 3. And it is really important that children coming into our schools from whatever countries, home or abroad, can feel free to be as they consider themselves in terms of race or ethnicity, in terms of their education. That it should be no barrier to them.
Okay. Have you concluded, Mr. McCausland?
Yes.
Just in relation to what Mr. McCausland has talked around in relation to UNCRC, UNICEF have a programme, Rights Respecting Schools, which a number of our schools are involved in. Can I just ask for your comments in relation to that, and whether you would be supportive or indeed would look to help schools fund being part of that programme?
Well, the schools that have chosen to do that have, as far as I'm aware, largely funded it from within their own resources. But certainly the department is content with the rights respecting schools. A number of schools have actually gone down that route. But there isn't currently a funding stream to fund that specifically, other than through the mainstream budgets, and that is largely high school on it.
Okay, and just how effective that programme has been, have you given any consideration to that?
The feedback that we've had from, and we haven't, I mean, I personally haven't looked in enormous detail at that programme, but the feedback that we've had from working with the officers here within the boards who are working with schools are that it is a very effective programme in relation to credit issues. I don't know whether
It would only be anecdotally as well, in the sense of what we would have picked up on inspection. We've never done a formal evaluation of it, but I suppose the requirement on all schools is around pupil voice and accessing pupil voice, and so I think that's probably at the more sophisticated end of really looking and helping young people to look at their rights. And even as Mr. McCausland said, to me the debates that our older pupils can have around definitions and around what is legal is the type of thing that can happen in that situation. So I think certainly the direction of travel with rights respecting schools would be something that we would see positively, but there hasn't been any formal evaluation of that work.
From the point of view of the inspectorate, we don't particularly promote one way of working, but we have had examples, and while, as Faustina says, we haven't done a formal evaluation of it, we've had it cited by inspectors in different situations where they've said it has worked particularly effectively for the children, though, as I say, we haven't had a complete overview of it.
Okay, well, thank you. Just in relation to mobile phones, could I just remind members and those in the gallery to make sure that your mobile phone's off, because there seems to be some interference just in the recording. Mr. Lunn?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Excuse me, and thanks for your presentation as ever. It does seem that this is purely a funding decision, isn't it, to terminate the programme. I appreciate the department's difficulties at the moment. You know, the times are tight, but at the same time, there seems to be a pattern developing of good programmes being terminated, and you wonder at what cost in human terms. If somebody had come along 2 years ago and given the opinion to you this CRED programme wasn't working very well and there was no need for it, the department would have defended it as being an excellent programme, and so would the ETI, I think, based on what I'm reading here. So now there's no money, so it has to go, and you sort of change tack and say, well, there's other ways to deliver this, and all the good practice hasn't been lost, and it'll all cascade down through the system, and in particular we're going to involve the Youth Council, which in itself appears to be facing the chopper, frankly. So I wonder where does all this end? I've seen it recently with language tuition in primary schools. I can make a comparison there, where an excellent scheme, highly valued, highly recommended by any authority you would speak to across Europe and beyond, thinks it's a terrific thing to try and encourage young children when they're capable of picking up a language so easily to learn a second language at primary school, but we're not going to fund it anymore. but the Minister says, well, it's okay because schools can use their surplus budgets. That's what he came off with in the House there recently. I think he was able to perhaps point to 2 schools who might be in a position to do that. So, your comment about the Youth Council, is it not a fact that the Youth Council is also under threat? And it might not be valid to say that you're going to utilise their expertise in this area.
Well, the issue with the Youth Council is that the Youth Council is still in existence, and under this year's funding, we have indicated to them that we would be expecting, certainly while the Youth Council remain, and that's for another, that's not our side that's dealing with that, but while they remain, we will expect them to deliver against the CRED policy, and if a decision is taken at some stage that they are not to remain, then whoever is dealing with those organisations in the voluntary youth sector, we will continue to work with to ensure the policy is addressed. I mean, the Minister's position in relation to funding is that he has taken every action to protect frontline services, and he has stated that it's simply not possible to protect everything. And faced with a £97.6 million funding gap, it's inevitable that some issues have to be addressed in a different way. And that is what we're aiming to do with the CRED policy. The CRED policy will remain in place. The challenge for us is to find ways to ensure that that good work is not lost.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. It's just looking at it in the round, it does seem that there's some very good programmes, which are not in the overall scheme of things particularly expensive, and which have received good reports over the years, and but they're now being sacrificed. They're not being reduced or cut. They're being cut out. Suddenly from being a terrific programme, which is well worth spending 1.2 million a year on, no, I don't need it anymore. And the language programme at £600,000 a year, not even upwards of £1 million, which is doing so much good for young children, in the opinion of most of us. No, we're not going to cut that to 400,000. We're going to cut it out. That's sorry. As usual, I don't have a particular question for you, but
well, the Minister's view on that is that the Minister believes that there are sufficient mitigating actions to avoid losing all of the good work that has taken place, and that when we are looking at reviewing the policy and revising the policy, those are the issues that we will be trying to draw to the fore through the policy.
Fair enough, thank you.
But I mean, what we want to do is build on the good experience, and I know somebody else mentioned the fact that maybe we would lose that experience. We've tried to capture that as much as possible through the website and the case study material. So where there has been really good practice, and in some cases that good practice doesn't cost an awful lot, other than people's attitudes are the main issue. One of the schools who actually responded to the consultation actually flagged up the fact that while the money was welcomed, that it wasn't the driving force for why they were doing this work, and they actually stated in the response that irrespective of whether funding was provided or not, they would continue to deliver this, and those are the sort of attitudes that really make a difference. I know that when I was involved in the consultation, when we were introducing the CRED policy, some of the respondents actually came to us and they said, at that stage the budget was reduced, and there was a lot of concern over how much we could actually deliver. But some respondents actually came and said, money is not the answer to everything, and it is about attitudes, and that is what we've sought to do with the earmarked funding. The earmarked funding was there with a view in the longer term to trying to mainstream this work within schools, and that's what the focus has been. And even going forward, the policy was due for review, and it was unlikely from the indications that we had, and we've been working towards this review over the last year, so before all the issues became clear around the current budgets, and the view was that the funding would be used in a different way moving forward, because we felt that we had addressed the capacity building and we had addressed the policy dissemination, and that was the information that was coming back through surveys.
Your anticipation would be at the funding, there would still be funding there. You might use it in a different way.
If funding's there, we would.
There's no funding.
Yeah, I mean, if funding was there, we would find a way to use it that is good value for money and actually drives forward the issues. The fact is that because of the budget situation and the Minister deciding that there are sufficient mitigating factors, we do not want to lose that work. I think that's the key message. We don't want to lose this work, and we want to drive this work forward, and we have to find other ways in which we can actually do that within existing funding.
When was the review to be completed?
Well, the review was scheduled. We had commissioned the inspectorate, and their review was to finish around Christmas. Then, with the report coming out January, which is what happened. We were then looking to update the policy, but in light of the budget decisions, we deferred that until we worked through, because obviously until the full public consultation was undertaken on the EKIA, we couldn't make final decisions. Now that that has worked through, we are starting to look at revising the policy. And as Faustina has referred to, the core of the policy doesn't change. What the policy was a sort of a core policy, plus there were a number of actions. Now, the actions that were associated with the policy at that stage took account of the fact that there was funding available. We will be looking at those actions and what alternative actions we can put into place to access, as far as possible, mainstream funding to make sure that we don't lose the aims of this policy. And there's also commitment by the Department to continue to monitor this work going forward, so that we will continue to see what if there are factors that we haven't been identified either by ourselves or through the public consultation.
You're going to continue the work without funding that required funding up until now?
Well, as I said, the funding was specifically to address the capacity building issues and dissemination of good practice and materials, and that was largely addressed, and that was the general conclusion, irrespective of the then budget issues that arose.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Overend.
Thank you, Chair. Just really, I suppose, to continue on that point, the Chair already referred to the uniformed organisations and the turnover of volunteers, but I mean the same goes for schools as well. Obviously, there needs to be continual training for teachers and for new teachers. Have you had discussions with the teacher training colleges, for instance, in this area?
Well, through some of the other programmes that we deliver, particularly the IFI shared education programmes.
Particularly what, sorry?
The IFI and shared education programmes. We had a programme really working with the teacher education institutions, with a couple of programmes, one working with the University of Ulster and the other with Stranlaws and St Mary's, a combined project. And those were to address particularly issues around shared education, but one of the aims of shared education is around reconciliation. So elements of those programmes that they delivered, we have encouraged them to look at how they train new teachers to ensure that that skill is continued to be addressed at that level as new teachers come through.
Right. Okay. So, sorry, just to go over what you said, you're looking at it rather than it's not implemented as yet, or what sort of stage are we at?
Yeah, and I think it's back to, Paul showed you the curriculum overview. All of the things that we're talking about within CRED are actually contained in the curriculum. There is that statutory requirement for schools to actually deliver that. We'd like to get to a point when a CRED policy wasn't actually required, because it is so integral to the curriculum. But the same applies to our teacher education colleges. They are preparing young people to actually come into the system to deliver the curriculum. So the expectation is there also. And I think one of the things I would say is when we have the luxury of additional funding, that is something that is always welcomed, but it will not stop good practitioners, whether that is in teacher education or whether that is in schools or youth organisations, delivering what they say is required of them. It's great if you're a teacher and you have 25 pupils as opposed to 30 pupils, or you have 20 pupils as opposed to 30 pupils, then your job is easier in a sense for you, but it won't change what you do. And I think that from the perspective of the teacher training educators. We have talked to them certainly around the shared education agenda about the possibility of working collaboratively and designing programmes that would address that issue. In our best practice, certainly when I was working in ETI and looking at the evaluation of the former programmes, in the best practice what we were seeing was schools going way beyond the reconciliation issues even in those programmes and dealing with the broader Section 75 issues. So we do have really developing good practice in schools and in our youth organisations and also in our teacher training institutions, and I think our job and the difficult job we face now is finding, if you want to call it low cost and no cost ways of actually supporting our schools and supporting our teacher trainers to continue to let that work grow. I'm not underestimating the difficulty of that, but that is what we have to do, and I think that's what we need to do, and everyone needs that support.
Well, I mean, Andrew referred earlier, I think it was that you know, that some of the responses said that they wanted to do the work even if there wasn't funding there, but really we can only depend on the goodwill of teachers for so long, and then somebody's going to break down at some stage. You referred in the paper about it's anticipated that there could be Piece 4 funding maybe available for something like this. Can you tell me some more about that and the timing of that?
Piece 4 funding, well, it's currently with the European Commission, so the Special EU Programmes body are waiting for the European Commission to come back on that. The last indication we had is it's likely to be later in the year before they will actually get a response from the Commission. That was mentioned as one of the mitigating factors, because one of the elements, although the core funding was around capacity building dissemination of good practice for CRED funding, we also encouraged the board. They put in the credit enhancement scheme where schools could actually apply for funding. The policy actually encourages that in the delivery of subjects like learning for life and work, personal development, mutual understanding, that it's not just about theory, it's about young people actually getting the opportunity to engage with other young people from different community backgrounds. And I suppose the key issue with the shared education funding and including the shared education funding to be available under the peace thematic area is that that funding will allow those type of opportunities still to happen, that schools can bring young people together from different community backgrounds, and that's the key. It's one of the mitigating factors, but not the only mitigating factor.
Okay, thanks for that.
If I could just come in on the teacher education, one of the things that we found where CRED was most effective was that good practice was being modelled by the professionals, by either the youth leaders or the teachers, in terms of the ethos of respect, etc., and the degree to which they promoted sharing. And I do think I welcome you raising the business of teacher education, because I think there is an opportunity there for the various organisations who provide teacher education to model that sharing for the whole community, for the whole education community, and to increase the amount of interaction and the amount of experiential learning that student teachers would have through that interaction.
I'm just also thinking then about monitoring the success of the ongoing community relations in the schools, etc., and the monitoring of it through CRED, and if it's moving into the curriculum, how will it be monitored? Will there be a specific monitoring of how those relations are developing in the future?
Well, we have indicated in the response to the AQIA and the public consultation that the inspectors at the moment will look at CRED issues within schools, so they will continue to do that. And one of the factors, because CRED is about attitudinal change, one of the key factors that we used was the Young Life and Times survey, and we commission that every other year. The current version will be due to be published in May of this year. which was in 2014, so we would be due to repeat that survey again in 2016, and that will again allow us to continue to monitor the impact on the attitudes of young people through CRED work that's happening in schools. And we will be looking very closely at the results of that, obviously given the implications around the fact that we no longer have the earmarked funding available to make sure that schools are continuing to deliver this.
I think one of the other things within the ETI report, and it's sparing Paul's blushes, it's a recommendation ETI made for itself, was really looking at the whole concept of self-evaluation. And that's one of the things that I think we will look at in the review of the policy. So there are CRED indicators which can be used for the self-evaluative process. So ETI has recommended that those are integrated into the Together Towards Improvement self-evaluation tool that ETI currently has. And so I think that in itself allows schools to begin to see that integration of CRED. They've had the opportunity to look at it as a separate set of indicators, but to see it as holistic with regard to the self-evaluation process that they will undertake. And then secondly, obviously ETI also recommended that this would become part and parcel of the inspection process, and that has already started to happen. At the minute, ETI is looking, particularly within shared education, at identifying good practice rather than something which is immediately looking at good and not so good. It is trying to cite where the practice is really good and can be built on in order to encourage people while we're still on that journey and that developmental journey. So that again was in the detail of the report, which I wouldn't have referred to obviously in the briefing.
I'm grateful to you for raising that, Faustina. One of the things that we would be quite adamant about is that there should be no compromise on high quality education in bringing people together. So it has to be good education that children experience as well as the sharing. And in the good educational outcomes, and it's the outcomes that we want for the children, that is really the test of what is provided. We would see good educational outcomes as having one element of academic outcomes in terms of the learning, as well as the reconciliation outcomes or the mutual understanding outcomes, but that they should come together in a really good experience for the learner.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Much. No one else has indicated, but just to conclude, what's your timescale for updating the policy?
We don't have a specific one as yet. We're just turning our attention to that now, so probably before the end of the summer. Would that be then, Andrew? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be looking to, we've already given some thought towards it and have looked at the core of the policy, so we know the core of the policy is unlikely to change, and we're looking then at the actions. It is a matter of trying to balance this, because my team are also leading on all the shared education work and the legislation. But our aim is to move that policy forward as quickly as we can. Given that the core of the policy doesn't change, as I said, is around the actions that are associated with it. So the fact that the core of the policy is unlikely to change means that should still apply to schools currently. But the aim, as Faustina said, unfortunately we don't have a specific aim, but certainly within this current year, whether it's by the end of the summer or not, you know, that I have somebody working on that at the moment.
Okay, and will there be a further consultation?
I think what we need to do at the minute, and that's why I'm saying even about there not being a specific aim, I think it is about a specific deadline. I think what we actually have to do is, on foot of the ETI report, now actually have face-to-face conversations, both with practitioners, also with the Education Authority, with the Youth Council, because I think it's not a case of us saying this is what you must do in a prescriptive way. I think it really is about working collaboratively with all of the education stakeholders, taking into account that we are where we are, the money is not there, and it is not a case of us then saying we're going to write all these wonderful things and require you to do them, as opposed to really work in practical terms. And I think if we can do that and build consensus around how we actually support each other to deliver on the CRED policy, then I think we would be in a better place. So, you know, I think that would be the first step for us before we would even look at something which would be a wider consultation. I think is having those frank face-to-face discussions to see what's possible and to inform our thinking, because I don't think it should be only our thinking which determines what the end product of the policy will be.
Obviously, the timescale is important because there's now a void with the removal of the funding.
Yes, I do appreciate that.
We'll look forward then to hearing back from you.
Okay, yes, absolutely.
So thank you very much. So Paul, you'll be leaving us, and you're going to be replaced by Suzanne.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on then to our next briefing on jointly managed church schools. Just members, if I can just refer you to the clerk's cover note at page 267 and to the relevant papers, which include a copy of the DE circular on jointly managed schools and an Assembly research paper on models of school ownership and management in this and other jurisdictions. Welcome, Suzanne, to the table. You're very welcome. And can I just again ask you to open with a statement, and members will follow with some questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are turning now then to the subject of the recently published circular on jointly managed schools, about which you also asked to be briefed. And as you say, Suzanne has joined us, and she's joined us because she has worked very closely with myself and Andrew on the development of the circular. Members may recall that we spoke briefly about ongoing work to develop guidance on establishing a jointly managed school when we appeared before the committee last July, and we did touch on it then. I'm pleased to say that the work has now concluded with the publication of the jointly managed school circular, and that was just earlier this month. In developing the guidance then, we worked closely with the Catholic Trustees and Transferors Representative Council, who were supportive of this concept, given that some communities had already expressed an interest in exploring it further. So the definition then that we have come up with, or that we have agreed, I think more than come up with, for a jointly managed school, is a grant-aided school providing shared education within a Christian ethos, with trustee representation agreed by the transferor churches and the Catholic Church. As set out in the guidance, such schools will be managed by a Board of Governors with balanced representation from both main communities. It is most likely that a jointly managed school will be established as a result of the amalgamation of former controlled and Catholic maintained schools. In such cases, development proposals will be required to close the existing grant-aided schools and establish then a new jointly managed school. Jointly managed, though, is not a new management type. Rather, it is envisaged that these schools will develop within the existing legislative framework, having a voluntary maintained management classification. The circular outlines the development proposal process, and more detailed advice is provided in the Department's recently updated development proposal guidance. A proposed school must be viable in the longer term against the criteria set out in the Department's Sustainable Schools policy. The development proposal will require widespread support of the local community that the school will serve. The proposal should also take account of the area planning context and consequently should be developed in consultation with the relevant planning authorities. The Board of Governors should be reflective of the Protestant and Catholic religious traditions and constituted through local agreement. It is expected that the ethos would be within a Christian framework, which respects both the religious ethos of the Catholic and transferor churches and where neither ethos would predominate. The ethos arrangements for worship and the approach to religious education must be agreed prior to bringing any proposal forward. Both the transferors and Catholic trustees are confident that such arrangements can be locally agreed and also practically implemented. For practical purposes, it's preferable that a formal body, such as a trust, would be established following the approval of any development proposal. Trustees would be appointed through a deed of appointment and would be the legal representatives of the school. The Board of Governors would be the employer of teachers for such schools, while the Education Authority will be the employer for all non-teaching staff. The Department is currently engaged in a review of home to school transport. Until this work is completed, jointly managed schools will be classified as within both controlled and other voluntary and Catholic maintained, and within those categories to reflect the origins of the original schools. This is designed to support local children attending their nearest school while recognising parental preference, and also is reflective of the need for widespread community support as a prerequisite. For that reason, it will have minimal impact upon the existing transport eligibility of pupils in an area, while nevertheless protecting the position of the existing integrated sector in line with the Department's statutory duty for this sector. Similarly, arrangements for temporary variation have been designed to avoid a situation where a jointly managed school would be considered as an alternative for a child who requests a place in any other sector. Naturally, the Department will keep these initial classifications under review as these schools are established to ensure that any potentially negative impact is minimised. In developing the circular, what we have done is respond to community interest in a way that is as straightforward as possible within the existing legislative and policy framework. In concluding, then, a jointly managed school offers a real and viable alternative to communities, and we believe that with the backing of local communities, this model has significant potential in providing effective local provision for children and young people. And we're happy to take any questions on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can I just ask why it's taken so long to get to this stage where we actually have this model now before us?
We've been in negotiation with both the Catholic trustees and the transfers, and it was important that they were on board. And there was no point in bringing it forward until all the issues were addressed. And during that process, it did take time, because as we worked through what most people thought was a relatively straightforward process, there were so many anomalies around transport, temporary variation, ownership issues, that all which had to be addressed and all which took time. And from working through as a group, every time we thought we got to a position, then another issue was raised. But it was important for the guidance that those issues were addressed to everybody's satisfaction, because we like the support of the transfers and trustees. It would be very difficult for these schools to be implemented. But equally, from the point of view of the schools, we wanted to make sure that we had covered as many of the issues as we were able to identify during the process. And the guidance does recognise that this is a new concept, that there may be other issues which arise, and we will address those as we go forward. But certainly what we have now is a fairly comprehensive set of covering all the issues which we've identified to date.
And just in light of the Drumrad judgment, how do you view these schools?
I think that's something that time will tell. In a sense, I think what we've tried to do within the guidance is to make this as flexible and as broad as possible, with the key aim being to ensure that no child will be disadvantaged in any way. So I think around the Drumrad judgment, I think there are things there which create ambiguities, which would leave this open to interpretation. And I think the important thing for us at this point in time is to ensure that we actually move this process forward. So I think that's a consideration, I suppose, for another time. And I think it's a time that we'd like to think that we can build consensus again around that issue in order to reach a resolution to it. But I think one of the issues around all of this, as Andrew said, is the technicalities of it and the complexities of it, so that nothing is actually straightforward in terms of making a comparison where you have like with like. It really isn't that way. So that leaves a degree of ambiguity, and Suzanne may want to add more on the technical side of that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, well, obviously in the technical sense, these are not integrated schools. Integrated schools are defined under Part 6 and Schedules 5 and 6 of the 1989 Education Reform Order. These schools aren't, they're maintained schools as defined in Article 2 of the 86 Order. So there's important legal differences in the composition of the governors and the ownership, etc. In terms of our treatment of the schools under Article 64, as Fasina said, there's some ambiguity there. What we have done in developing the guidance is make sure that the current position of existing integrated schools in terms of transport policy and temporary variation policy is in no way compromised. And that's been an important consideration. So we've given, obviously in the transport classification and the TV categorisation for these new schools, the existing position of established integrated schools. There's no overlap between them.
Okay, but Article 64 says, obviously provides a duty on the department to encourage and facilitate the development of integrated education. That is to say, the education together at school of Protestant and Roman Catholic pupils, which is exactly what this proposal is doing.
Yes.
And it's under that piece of legislation, obviously, that the protections are given to the integrated sector as we currently know it. So what really is the difference?
Well, Justice Tracy, in the judgment, he not only said that in the legislation, obviously states the education of Catholics and Protestants together, he went on to say that isn't enough. It has to be at the same school, not having a predominant ethos of one religion and a balanced representation on the boards of governors. The other thing he went on to say was that Article 64, and I'll just read it for you, of the Education Reform Order applies only to integrated education as a standalone concept within the confines of Part 6 of the 89 Order. Now, Part 6 of the 89 Order spells out the constitution of grant, maintained and controlled integrated schools. So that's where a little bit of ambiguity comes into that judgment. So what we're saying is that under Article 64, if we were to categorically place these schools under Article 64 and say they're integrated before any are established, we may disadvantage children who are currently attending an established integrated school, and we've no desire to, in this concept, because, well, for example, if we categorise them as integrated for transport purposes, a child who lived within statutory walking distance of one of these schools, who was currently getting transport assistance to an established integrated school, would be no longer entitled to that. So that child would be disadvantaged.
I think we're sort of dancing on the head of a pin in relation to this one, because what Faustina, you said in your opening remarks with regards to a balanced board of governors, and that neither Protestant or the Catholic religion would predominate, is exactly what Suzanne has indicated.
And I think that's
with
why
regards to integrated.
there's
So I'm not really sure what the difference is. The integrated sector is still going to be regarded as having a privileged position over these schools?
This was driven by a desire from communities. If you recall, after the Minister publishes the Ministerial Advisory Group report was published, he had a period of civic debate, during which stage he actually said to communities, to bring forward innovative ideas, and that providing they brought forward innovative ideas, he would look at them. And this is where the origin of this. So this is very much bottom up, and it has come from communities who are aware that there are options with integrated. The big difference, I suppose, is that these schools will have representatives of the Catholic and transfer churches as a formal role in the governance, and indeed in managing those individual schools. So therefore, that I suppose is one of the key differences, and the fact that it has been driven from the communities who, for whatever reason, felt that integrated was not an approach which their community wanted to go down. This does offer an alternative option with this type of school.
It may be a key difference in the governance, but the practicalities of it are that it's still educating together Protestant and Roman Catholic children.
Yeah. And the department none of these schools are established yet, and the department will look at how Article 64 potentially applies to these schools as development proposals come forward, and the schools are established, and we will look and keep under review how Article 64 applies to these schools.
I'll open it up to other members, and then I'll come back to some questions. Mr. Lunn.
Yes, I'm interested to see you asking questions that I was going to ask, but you're perfectly entitled to. It's just a surprise, I think dancing on the head of a pin just about describes it correctly. I mean, if a parent in any area you like was keen to send their child to an integrated school, let's say, and they do, and poll after poll indicate that they would like to if there was one available. And if this thing gathers legs and actually works out that there will be jointly managed church schools available, I would have thought that most parents would be probably quite happy with that option, because it is Protestants and Catholics being educated together under one roof. It's not a Moy or a Brookper situation. It's educating together with a non-partisan board. And you may, fair enough, Suzanne, say it's established under different legislation and orders and so on, but it is actually the same thing, so I couldn't do otherwise than to welcome it. I do wonder, you talked about the Catholic trustees, but where does CCMS stand in this? Because based on what they've said to us and recent visits to this committee, they would be absolutely opposed to this. So what view have you had from them?
I think CCMS comment, but obviously we worked with the trustees closely on this, and both trustees fed back throughout the process, and CCMS formally commented on the guidance as an organisation, and there was no indication of any objection in terms of the content of CCMS as an organisation.
Well, CCMS, when they've come to us recently on 2 occasions now, have first of all lambasted the integrated sector and the special status which they appear to think that it has, which I can't actually work out personally. And they've also laid out what their remit is, which is perfectly simple from their point of view. It's only one sentence. It's to open, maintain and close Catholic schools. That's it. So it doesn't include amalgamations. In fact, they set their face very strongly against amalgamations. But here we have a situation which I welcome, where the Catholic trustees appear to be joining into this with some enthusiasm.
All I can say is that we've worked with CCMS through some of this, with representatives, and indeed with the boards at that stage, and obviously now the Education Authority, and we haven't encountered any problems in discussions around schools or communities who are interested in this.
Well, maybe light is beginning to dawn even in the dark recesses of CCMS. You talked about the Drumrad judgment, Suzanne. It probably has a bit to go yet. It was left a bit vague, but we now have the actual judgment on Drumrad School, and it's not for me to preempt what might happen, but there may be further clarification. But whatever clarification Judge Tracy might come up with, it still points to the fact that what has now come out of the blue, under the radar from the 2 church bodies as a suggestion, is pretty much an integrated solution. So there you are again, find a question.
I mean, I should clarify that we have worked with the transfers and trustees, but the origin of this is from communities themselves, and I think that's a key element, that it hasn't been driven by the churches or the transfers or the department. It has come from communities, and we have responded to that. And to be fair, working with the transfers and the trustees, they have been very open and working with us around this concept. So the fact that there are communities who are keen on this issue, which is obviously at the upper end of shared education, as is the integrated schools, I think is a good thing.
But this doesn't. You did mention shared education in your presentation. One of you did. This isn't shared education. Shared education is not the coming together of Protestant and Catholic children under one roof in one school with a joint non-partisan board. It's a completely different thing from that. This is effectively, I mean, some people are horrified at the integrated word, but this is actually what it is.
A lot of the relationship, we would see a lot of the schools and the communities that are interested in this would have evolved from shared education and partnership through shared education and the building and forging of those relationships within the communities. And almost as Andrew says, this is a further form of it. This is the next step on the ladder. As Andrew said, communities have expressed an interest. The department's provided the guidance in order to give that option and to give clarity around how you would go about doing that. And it's for communities to decide whether it's an integrated option, a jointly managed option, existing controlled, it's for communities within the context of area planning to come forward with these proposals.
It was also a very specific commitment within the draft policy, which has obviously gone to public consultation as well, that we would look at different structural issues, and this is specifically mentioned within the shared education policy.
So, sorry to belabor this, Chair, but do tell me what the difference is, because the concept of transformation to integrated status also comes from the bottom up. This is it needs the parents and the governors, who are sometimes a bit hard to convince that this is a way to go. But it's community driven. This is going to be community driven again, and it's going to be driven to the same end solution, which is it's set out in Drumrad judgment. So I mean, I don't know why you're making other than a technical difference in terms of the past legislation or regulations under which certain sectors are set up.
Well, there are it's more than just a technical difference. There's quite a number of day-to-day running differences as well between these schools and a grant-maintained integrated school. Well, the funding authority, of a list of things. The employer of teachers is different. The funding authority is different. The owners of the estate is different. The responsibility for rates, for landlord maintenance, for running non-teaching payroll, for purchasing an invoice. There's a long list of practicalities that are very different in these schools than they are in grant-maintained integrated schools.
We've tried to put that together even for ourselves in a straightforward way, and we'd be happy to send that to you as well, because it is, it is quite technical in that way. And you do have to keep reading it and rereading it to actually get the logistics
That's the word
of
I
it.
use, technical differences. In terms of the classroom, if this works out the way it's conceived, it will be the same as an integrated school. It will be based on effectively an integrated model without the particular legal status. It's a slightly different legal it has the same result.
And I think what we're trying to do here is be cautious until a school is actually established, because that is your view. Yeah. And you will be well aware that other people will have a different view that will maybe focus on the technicalities of this. And what we think is most important here is that we actually encourage and support the schools to work, the community to work together to actually establish this school, which is something different in that way and something new, but that may have all of the elements that you've described.
Yes,
and if it leads to the question that you're asking, which is, what is there any difference here? Well, I think that would be a healthy discussion for us to have as a whole community further along the road when a school is actually established. What we're doing here is looking at something which is not in place yet. There is no development proposal for one of these schools.
Yeah.
We've said in the guidance that what we're trying to do is, it was hugely important, I think, that the transferors and the Catholic Church felt that this was a relationship of trust that was building up, that we were being very open with them, that all of the barriers, and so many of them, as Andrew said, were technical, that where there was a will, there was a way, that we would find ways to support the guidance actually reaching fruition. And I think the fact that we have got to that stage is where we are now, and we can't go any further until we actually have a development proposal to establish these schools. But it's not from our perspective being awkward. Right. We're trying to be practical and realistic in the circumstances in which we all find ourselves, while encouraging the development of skills.
It was my view, and I was entitled to it. That view has been expressed elsewhere around this table today by people who don't necessarily share my view on integrated education, but I'm not going to go on about
I may have slightly different concerns, and my emphasis might be slightly different, Trevor.
You did mention dancing on the head of a pin. But frankly, I'll just...
I think it is important to recognise, though, for some key stakeholders in the process, for example, the issue of school ownership. It may be a technical issue, but it is an important issue for a number of stakeholders.
Well, you will say if it walks like a duck and quacks, it's normally a duck.
Well, the key thing here is that communities now have a choice. Communities who wish to go for an integrated school, that choice is still open to them. Communities who, for whatever reason, don't feel that they are ready to go to an integrated school, This offers an alternative choice for them to bring young people and educate young people together. That's what communities have told us. That's where the origins of this came from. So, you know, we have responded to what communities are telling us.
And it is guidance, and we will keep it under review. I think we are, you know, we've tried to get to this point, and we're pleased that we have got to this stage, but until we get a development proposal, then we can't really test this any further.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, and thanks again. And just following on from that point of Travers, do you foresee the situation where a jointly managed school could transfer to integrated status?
That would, I mean, that would require obviously a further development proposal to, you know, become an integrated school under Article 89. But there would be nothing to there's nothing to preclude a maintained school transforming to become an integrated school.
Okay. And maybe, could you clarify this for me? In terms of controlled schools, is there any legal protection there for the Christian ethos in controlled schools?
Yeah, the legislation relating to controlled schools is they must provide undenominational Christian education. That's, you know, that's what controlled schools provide.
So then, if there's a jointly managed school, there would be a legal protection for the Christian ethos, because you did, Christina, talk about you would need the governors to work out between them about the Christian ethos. But is there legal protection there for the Christian ethos in a jointly managed school?
They wouldn't. The development proposal wouldn't be brought until that had been agreed. You know, that is actually something. When I was reading through the guidance for you there, that would have to be agreed by both schools before they would bring the development proposal forward. So I think that protection would be there in the sense of a consensus agreement that is between both parties. And that would be decided before the development proposal was actually brought to the department. So I think it's not a case of, to me, if that is done beforehand, then the protection is there. If a development proposal was approved with no agreement on how that Christian ethos would operate, then that would be much more complex and difficult. So it's that local agreement again, I think, by the contributing parties who would decide in advance.
It's also important to remember that 4/9 of the Board of Governors will be trustee representatives, and the guidance stipulates that in looking at a development proposal we would expect the trustee representatives to be split between the transferring churches and the Catholic Church, so there would be a strong Christian element within the Board of Governors of the school, built into the management of the school.
And maybe it's a very simple question, but is a jointly managed school always going to be Protestant and Catholic coming together? Is there any possibility that you could have a maintained school, a CCMS school, and a grammar school that have a different set of trustees coming together as a jointly managed school?
The guidance that we've put forward is very specific. You know, the technicalities of the guidance, as it's been called, are specific to a controlled and maintained school coming together at present. But if other schools were interested in working towards this type of management type, obviously the department, or other communities were interested in it, obviously the department would be working with them on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. McCausland.
Thank you. Just two questions. One, in terms of demonstrating community support, or indeed someone did want to demonstrate community opposition to a proposal, how would that be done?
Well, the strategy development proposal process includes both a pre-consultation period and then a full 8-week public consultation period, which allows all views and objections to be forwarded to the Minister and included in the submission to the Minister. Obviously as well, in the pre-consultation...
Just, can you maybe hold for a second until we...
Just get that switched off, sorry about that. Sorry, it's the renovations in the building, they're nearly finished. But we have asked them not to do this during committee meetings.
It seems to have stopped.
And obviously there'd have to be consultation with at the early part of the development process, before even a proposal was drawn up or brought forward. There'll have to be consultation with the whole school community of each of the schools involved as well.
And what about the wider community? That if someone has children but they're not at the school yet?
As I said, there's a full public consultation that everybody can be engaged with, and also the proposer has a number of meetings across the community before it's published.
And the department will be looking for that wider, because we know from fact if you do not have that wider community support, parents will vote with their feet and will move to other schools. And the last thing we want to do is create schools which are unsustainable. So that's why that widespread community support is.
Second question was this: we live in a very different world today from what it was some years ago, and within the Protestant community there would be a very, very wide range of denominations. I think there are about 6 different types of Presbyterians in Northern Ireland, just taking the Presbyterian tradition alone. If you have in an area a controlled school with the transfers, and then the Roman Catholic school with the trustees coming together into a single school, and there were people, and there might be people from some of the churches that are involved, where their ministers are maybe sitting or representatives on as transfers. There might be those in those schools, or others who feel that that's not the thing for them. And I'm just concerned here to get some clarity around the arrangements then. If someone's child is going to a controlled school, and then the decision was taken to move in this direction, would they get free transport to another controlled school some distance away if they felt that wasn't the choice? In other words, is that a different category for transport, or would they not?
It would depend on so many individual circumstances, because if they lived within statutory walking distance of any school, obviously they don't get transport assistance.
I just did simplify the thing. I'm thinking, for the sake of argument, of some little village somewhere where you are quite a few miles from the next village and the next school. And if the schools came together in a particular village, presumably the children in that village at the moment can walk to the school. But if they were to go to the village 4 miles away or whatever.
In a scenario where a child lives within statutory walking distance of a jointly managed school, they wouldn't receive transport assistance to go to another controlled or maintained school outside statutory walking distance.
So a child there whose parents, for particular religious reasons, felt that that was inappropriate for them, would not have the option of going to a school.
They would have the option.
Without having to pay for the extra transport themselves.
They wouldn't get transport assistance if they lived within statutory walking distance of it.
And that's why it's key that there is widespread community support for these schools.
Yeah. But if the controlled school closed in the village, they would get the transport cost to the next village 4 miles away.
If there was no other controlled option within
statutory walking distance. Yes, I'm assuming that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has that been factored in the position of parents who may not wish their children to attend school at this time?
Yeah, I mean we've looked at, we did a very detailed analysis of all the transport options for these schools, and taking into account, all the different.
If the two schools came together as a single integrated school, would the parents whose children had previously attended the controlled school get free transport to the next village?
The two schools can't come together as an integrated school.
If the two schools closed or something of that nature, anyway, the controlled school in the village disappeared, would they get free transport?
If there was an integrated school within statutory walking distance of their home, they would, and they wanted to go to a controlled school outside statutory walking distance of their home, yes, they would get transport assistance.
So, in effect, for those parents, there could be a disadvantage in this scenario.
There's. Under every scenario, we looked at the pros and the cons and the numbers likely to be affected, and there was, we took all that into account, and the answer to the question is yes. If a child lives within statutory walking distance of this school, they won't receive transport assistance. But you've also got to consider that only 10% of primary children receive transport entitlement. We're talking about a small group of people.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Overend.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question about, is there going to be a minimum enrolment level for the schools in these categories?
It's going to be looked at all the development proposals are obviously looked at on a case-by-case basis, but they're looked at within the framework and the context of the Sustainable Schools Policy and all six viability indicators within the Sustainable Schools Policy. That obviously includes enrolment, but it also includes quality of education, links with the community, accessibility to other provision. There's never, and looking at any school, the department doesn't have a cut-off whereby it wouldn't fall in that will be the case for these schools as well. It's within the wider context of the Sustainable Schools Policy.
And are they assessed then individually rather than together? Do you know?
The development proposal for the new school will indicate the proposed enrolment for the new school, and it would be that proposed enrolment that obviously would be taken into account for the new school once both schools are closed. So,
yeah. So, do you think would there be a level set for both schools? You know, one might be much bigger than the other one. Do you know, is that taken into consideration?
The new school will have its own approved enrolment, do you know, and what we've said in the guidance is that only in exceptional circumstances would we expect that to be higher than the combined enrolment of the two existing schools. We'd probably expect it to be in line with the combined enrolment. If there's a lot of surplus capacity in both schools, if both schools are only half full, we'd obviously be looking to say, well, actually, in improvement, you know, in bringing forward a proposal for the enrolment, you may want to look at reducing that surplus capacity. Yeah. Okay. But don't look. The new school will be looked at as a new school, not as this school was this enrolment, this school was this enrolment. It's the proposal for the new school and the likelihood of the school achieving that enrolment that's proposed.
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you. I just want to refer back just to the legal protection for Christian ethos. There is no legal protection for Christian ethos within control schools because it must be non-denominational. Is that correct?
Well, it's Christian ethos.
It's
undenominational Christian
instruction. But there's no. Is there a legal protection on that?
Well, it says a controlled school must provide.
Okay, and is that the same provision for integrated?
I'm not sure, to be honest. We'd have to come back. We could come back to you on that in terms of the integrated schools and the exact legislation governing it.
Okay, and I suppose really just sort of following on would be what the nature of the legal protection would be just in relation to Christian ethos for the jointly managed schools. Yeah. So that clarification would be useful. And also the differences, technical or otherwise, that there are between jointly managed schools, church schools, and integrated schools would be useful for us. No one else has indicated at this juncture. We will be returning to this again, I would imagine. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure, I got the answer in regard to that scenario that I was setting out of parents who, for particular religious reasons, do not wish their children to go to a school of this type. I'm not sure it was satisfactory as an answer. I don't think much consideration has been given to children and parents in that situation. Can we find out the nature of the consideration that was given? Was it simply a case of, oh, here's an issue, well, we'll stick that in the too difficult drawer, forget about it? I think it's very unfair that parents would find themselves in that position.
I think it seems to fall under how it's classified, whether you want to classify it as integrated or otherwise, because obviously that would then make the difference, particularly around home to school transport.
But since we've already said around this table that it's de facto integrated.
Whether you use the label or not, it's really the classification of how it's been considered in the context. But it might be useful we can follow that up with them.
I think it's got a long way to go, this, but if these schools could in some way be categorised in the same way as integrated schools, it would actually solve the transport problem. You know?
Sorry, Chair, just for clarification, we'll just write to the department seeking an explanation on
what consideration they've given to the issue and what possible actions might be taken to address that issue?
In respect of parents who don't want to send their children to a jointly managed church
Yes.
school for religious reasons.
Yes.
Because there's clearly an assumption that this will obviously come from the community, and everyone in the community will buy into it, but that's not always necessarily the case.
What we also want to know is, as you'd indicated, Chair, just there now about the legal protections for the Christian ethos in the different types of schools. And the committee also, sorry, in terms of the previous briefing, just want to write the department seeking cited the CRED update and the findings of the Young Life and Time survey, which is apparently May 2015.
If we're writing, can we also ask how they define Christian ethos?
Is there legal protection for a Christian ethos in any of our schools?
And that's what we've asked for. They're going
Yeah, but it's not just.
so it's not, we're not really that clear.
It just seems to be an agreement between the governors.
But as sorry, Chair, as members will recall, the Commission indicated that they believed that there was a legal protection for the Christian ethos in jointly managed church schools, and that's what the Chair was attempting to.
I think we just we look for clarification from the department around all of the schools and just where that stands.
Yeah.
Taking Nelson's scenario then, that if these schools are obliged to provide a Christian ethos, if somebody was from an atheistic background, how would they be catered for? Would they get home to school transport to travel somewhere that wasn't providing a Christian ethos? Or let's say a Catholic who didn't want to send their child to this particular type of school. I mean, we can go to ridiculous lengths here to, try and find one person who actually mightn't want to attend the school. I think it's a sort of ridiculous conversation we're having.
But it's really around the classification of the school and whether you consider it to be integrated or not. Because obviously that then will then preclude you then going to an alternative.
I just can't
school.
understand why someone from a Christian background wouldn't want to go to a school that provides a Christian ethos in the school. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit stupid, but...
That's how you define Christians, doesn't it?
Okay.
Protestant Christians.
Are you content with how you
Yes, fine.
propose to deal with this? Okay. Thank you very much. The final discussion around the inquiry will take place on the 13th of May, where we'll have the department with us again. So we may have clarification on some of those issues in advance of that meeting. If we can ask for that. Moving then through to correspondence, just refer you pages 307, 309. We have 11 items provided under correspondence and 7 tabled items. There's one I would like to just raise under the 9.6. That's the delivering social change, and we've also a tabled item from DE in relation to this. We have a holding letter from OFMD-FM on the literacy and numeracy programme, and there's a tabled response from DE. They clarify that the programme is coming to an end and additional funding is sought to continue places only for those schools who have yet to have a teacher for the full 2 years, and there is to be no further recruitment in relation to that. I asked Peter just to table an extract from Hansard on Tuesday the 14th of April, where the Minister had indicated an expectation that the programme will continue, hence why we had written to OFMD-FM. So it might be useful for us to go back just to DE, just seeking an explanation as to the remarks made by the Minister. That was during the NSMC statement. So members are content that we do that. I don't know if anyone else has any comments to make in relation to anything we have here in the items in your pack. There are a number of issues. There are a number of items in tabled. With the ISNI capital programme update. So members are content that we note that update of the DE Capital report. We have the response from DE on the Education Authority business case. Again, if members are content that we note that response from DE just on queries that we had in relation to the business case. Further response from DE on the ETI inquiry. And again, if members are content to note that response at this stage, we obviously return to the inquiry in the future. I think we're still outstanding some correspondence in relation to that, aren't we?
I think that's their answer, but what the committee I think had agreed was that we would seek some further information, the views of the child, for example, in respect of inspection and return to this issue again later in the, well, maybe not in this session, but certainly later in the mandate.
Okay, 9.16, an invitation to myself to attend the AHT conference, and that's for the 14th of May. I may be unable to attend on the 14th, but I know that it's on the 15th as well, so I may be able to go in the morning of the 15th if that would be okay for them. So 9.17, again table item, it's with regards to ineligible pupils' use of school transport, and that relates to the correspondence that we've had around St Ronan's issue, around ineligible children not being able to use contracted services, so that they can't pay the fare. So that might be, if members are content, that we forward that on to the parents who have met with us last month. And then 9.18, again from DE, in relation to the school counselling service. If you're content that we note the response from the department on concerns raised by Unison in respect of the retendered school counselling service, we may wish to receive an oral briefing on that, but certainly we will want to forward that correspondence on to Unison. So if we do that maybe in the interim, to see whether they have any further comments to make, and if members feel that there's something further that we should do, that we could then seek an oral briefing. Agree with that? Okay. And obviously then with regards to bus safety, we forward the query to DOE. So are members content with those actions and those indicated on the cover sheet?
Yep.
Okay. Any other items you want to raise under correspondence?
Just to see, there's an invitation from the Fermanagh Trust to a celebration lunch. That's really been mentioned, no?
I'm going to take
that's on the same day as we go to Derrygonnelly.
It is, yeah. So
Not sure where Derrygonnelly, how far
It's
away
quite
it is
close.
from Enniskillen, but
it's in the same area.
combination.
That might be something we want to discuss just under forward work programme. Okay. Just refer you to that programme. It's page 350 to 352. And Peter, would you want to just go through the changes?
Yes, Chair. It's in the forward work programme. Home Education Northern Ireland had asked to meet with members informally, so that's arranged for Tuesday 12th of May, 9:30 in room 30. So if members can advise on their availability, so that collective Home Education.
12th, 9:30.
Tuesday 12th, 9:30 in room 30 for about an hour, and that will work.
Yep.
And then members had agreed last week that as part of the inquiry to meet with some of the Catholic maintained or Catholic voluntary grammar schools that were super mixed or mixed. St Columbanus has come back and said they would meet with members on Tuesday 26th May at 12:30. Again, just to chat about their ethos and again to inform members' understanding on that part of the inquiry. So if members can again indicate their availability to committee staff. And finally, as the member just indicated, committee had agreed to schedule its meeting in Derrygonnelly on the 10th of June. So Derrygonnelly is the far side of Enniskillen. You go off towards the cliffs of Magho. It's very nice. It's a really very beautiful part of the country. So a number of members indicated just about enough to indicate their intention to attend. And the Fermanagh Trust had invited members to attend a shared education event at lunchtime on that day. So that might fit in quite neatly. Get a freedom. So, Chair, if members
Are members content?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And also the CCMS are having their launch today at 1:30 in room 115. So again, if members are around, I encourage them to attend that.
Sorry, just say that again.
CCMS are having a launch of 2 reports at 1:30 in room 115.
Wasn't that supposed to be last week?
That was 2 weeks ago. I know I got my diary mixed up.
I turned up for that.
So did I. Okay, moving swiftly on. Any other business, Mr.
Yes,
Rogers?
I have an item in any other business. Some of the schools, I don't know whether this has happened right across the schools that have been got capital bills or capital extensions as a result of the school enhancement project. But it might be worth, it would certainly be worth writing to the department, because I have 2 schools that I've been speaking to in my area. One is Knockhaven Special School in Downpatrick that have a new purpose-built early years special school in Dundrum. But as part of that special school, obviously it needs furniture and equipment to equip it. They had a budget, they were given a budget of 340,000. They've been told recently that's been scrapped. So we're going to have a nice new building in Dundrum, but we're going to have no equipment to put into it when the school opens in December. The other one is a school in Carneycavel, just outside Newcastle. It's a very popular primary school, and they have lots of mobiles and so on. So they got a great extension as well. They had been awarded, they had been 120,000 been allocated for furniture and equipment and so on. You know, and particularly in terms of Key Stage 1 and foundation stage, there's a lot of equipment associated with play and so on. So their budget's been cut to 0 as well for that.
So, Chair, just to clarify, these are 2 schools that have got SEP money to put on an extension.
Yeah, but there was
then they've got the other.
But it might be worth inquiring, has this happened in all SEP bills that are happening at the minute? It's a very, very worrying situation. I think maybe the Minister has said, you know, in terms of, we should be looking in terms of June monitoring or whatever, but it's a very worrying situation for schools that they have basically a new build and they'll have no equipment to put in it.
They're really not finishing the job.
Might be worth people checking out in their own areas as well in terms of SEP.
Well, maybe what we could ask is to give us a list of the schools where obviously the DE will be aware of the schools which they're not seem to be completing.
Okay.
Okay. Any other business from any other members? No? Okay, thank you very much. The date and time of the next meeting is Wednesday the 13th of May, so we're not here next week, and that's at 10 AM in the Senate chamber. So if members are content, we shall adjourn. Thank you.
Enjoy your list.
Peter, just 1 week.